Of all the guests that I've had on the Behind the Shot podcast, today's guest is rather unique. It's a cinematographer that was responsible for shooting the first ever IMAX film that was nominated for an Academy Award. He's got 32 credits in IMDb, and he's taught over 150 astronauts and cosmonauts how to use IMAX film in space. Today, it's photographing the Palouse through a cinematographer's eye on this episode of Behind the Shot. Hi again, welcome to another episode of Behind the Shot. I'm your host, Steve Brazel. This is the podcast where we try and get inside the mind of great photographers by taking a closer look behind one of their shots, from conception to completion, all the challenges and issues and problems and stories that happen in between. And today I've got somebody on that I have to say is kind of out of the realm of who I would normally even be in a room with, let alone talk to. Because my guest today is, let's put it this way. My guest today is listed in IMDb 32 times. All right. This is a guy who has taught astronauts how to shoot IMAX in space. I'm not in his realm, but I do want to welcome him to the show. James, how are you?
I'm doing great, Steve. Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to be able to talk to you today.
Yeah, it's actually a pleasure to be able to talk to you, and I will say it's an honor to be able to talk to you, James. James Neihouse you're Florida-based, right?
I am in Central Florida. Yep.
Okay, you're Florida-based, and you're a photographer, which is kind of why you're here on this show. But wow, are you much more than a photographer? You're a photographer and a cinematographer. So I don't want to try and wrap up your career, right? Me doing a helicopter view of your career, I guarantee you, it would be like an Academy Award speech where you list 10 people, but the 11th person was the only one watching and you didn't mention them. I'm going to screw it up somehow. So give us the helicopter view of who you are and what you do.
Okay, well, I've shot a lot of helicopter shots, so this should be fairly straightforward. I started out taking still pictures when I was a kid. I really don't remember when I didn't have a camera. Went the usual route of like the high school yearbook, shot pictures for that, which was great because I had all the cheerleaders eating out of the palm of my hand, which was great.
Exactly. Something all of us wanted, yeah.
That's right. And then went on to Brooks Institute of Photography in Santa Barbara. Right after I graduated from high school, was going to learn still photography, got into industrial, scientific, color technology.
And since you mentioned Brooks, I apologize. Let me interrupt you on something because I'm curious. Since you're a Brooks graduate, the loss of Brooks. I did not go to Brooks. I know a lot of people who have, and I've had a number of Brooks graduates on the show. But it really is a huge loss to the photo community, right?
It is a real great loss to the photo community. It was active for 70 years, had some of the great photographers come through that place. It's a shame that they just couldn't survive in this day and age. And it was real sad to see that last day go. Yeah. So anyway, I apologize interrupting you. Continue. Yeah, that's no problem. Anyway, after Brooks, I had gotten into underwater photography at Brooks, and that got me a job in a production company in Santa Barbara that specialized in underwater. And about 2 months after I graduated, this guy named Graham Ferguson, who was the CEO and founder of IMAX, came with this big camera and wanted to shoot underwater. They'd never shot underwater, and so we kind of helped them put a program together to make a film. He wanted to learn how to dive. I was a dive instructor, taught him how to dive. They took me along to keep him alive when he went in the water and to be shark bait.
I hope you succeeded.
I succeeded because it was Graham that eventually got me into the space program with IMAX. And that's I've kind of specialized in space, but I've done other things. I've done Michael Jordan. We did a film about Michael Jordan. I've done chimpanzees and polar bears and the Rolling Stones and all sorts of, that's kind of up your alley, the Rolling Stones, I guess.
Well, and that's in my notes. And here's the reason it's in my notes. Okay. And let me just say, you do have 32 cinematographer credits in IMDb, over 1,000 different film and video projects. And on the Rolling Stones things, you documented the Steel Wheels tour.
Mm-hmm.
Well, during the Steel Wheels tour, to my knowledge, there was only, I've been in radio for 40 years. There was only one main interview that the band did, radio interview that the band did, and it was put out on a 6 CD set. And I have that 6 CD set.
Oh, wow. That's very cool.
It's one of my pride and joys, actually, is that set. So let's go back to the IMAX, because this is fascinating to me. The first ever, I mean, I'm assuming all the viewers have, if not seen an IMAX film, heard of IMAX.
Right.
Right. Huge, large format film surrounds you, that type of thing. The first IMAX movie nominated for an Academy Award, was done by director George Casey. And it was on, which I remember, I'm old enough to remember this, The Eruption of Mount St. Helens in 1980.
1980,
okay.
Yep.
And you were on that.
I shot it, yep.
You shot the first ever IMAX movie nominated for an Academy Award. Now,
that's correct.
Now, most people at that point would go, well, shoot, I can die now. You kept going, and you now have, you mentioned the space program.
Mm-hmm.
People, here's a guy who has taught astronauts and cosmonauts how to shoot IMAX film in space. This is right. Am I right? Do you ever look in the mirror and go, wow, that's me?
That's, well, after about 30 years, the image looking back in the mirror, it's like, okay, I can see that you've been at it 30 years. It's still special, but a little of the new is worn off finally. But I still get chills when I think about the fact that I've worked with some of the greatest astronauts, made some really great movies with them. And it's fun. I mean, one of my students is launching, I guess, next week to go and live on space station for 6 months. So, they're still going. Yeah,
that's special. And I may misunderstand what this award is, but the way I interpreted when I researched this award, you got something called the Silver Snoopy Award. That's the astronaut's personal award for professional excellence. Am I right in assuming that's the astronauts choosing who to give it to, not the space program as a whole?
Right. That's the astronauts individually will give out this award. It's given to less than 1% of the people that are eligible to get it.
And you got it.
And I got one. It was really pretty special because it's right after the very first space station crew returned from orbit, and we were watching their film in an IMAX theater. And after the film was over, they said, "We got something for you." So they pulled me down the front of the theater and presented me with the Snoopy, and I cried like a baby. And but it was pretty cool because about usually only one astronaut signs the letter, and my letter was signed, I think, by 7 or 8 different astronauts, including the first crew aboard the space station. So that was kind of cool. I
mean, wow. Right? I mean, just wow.
Yeah.
And on top of all of this pedigree that you have, as a stills photographer and a videographer, I see a banjo behind you.
Oh, I forgot to put that up.
No, I need to get you with Rick Salmon, who's a phenomenal guitarist, and have you guys play something on the show sometime. That would be absolutely hilarious.
It would be hilarious. That's for sure.
So,
from my part.
Let's get into your photograph here a little bit. When you shoot stills, you shoot a number of different things. And when you and I were first going back and forth, kind of picking an image, right? I like to try and have my guests suggest images that they want to talk about. But there was one on your site of the space launch, of a rocket launcher, a space shuttle launch. Mm-hmm. That was so awesome, but it didn't really fit a video format the way it was. It just wasn't going to really fit, but it is in the gallery.
Yep.
And then as I'm looking through the rest of your site going, wow, this guy does all this space stuff. And suddenly I ran across a shot from the Palouse. And I have heard from so many friends of mine and well-known photographers that do workshops to the Palouse area, what a beautiful area it is, and photographing it. And then I saw the shot we're about to bring up and thought, okay, now I get it, right? And the reason it's interesting to me is because I believe I see stuff in this shot, and maybe it's just because I know your history, right? But I believe I see stuff in this shot that a normal, great, even landscape photographer would not have done. There is a cinematography look and feel,
Right.
a motion look and feel to this shot. So we'll bring it up in a second. In fact, let's just bring it up right now. The Palouse. Explain to me the Palouse.
The Palouse is a beautiful area of southeastern Washington State, and it's mostly just farm fields, wheat, barley, granola. It's all part of
Could be both, yeah.
They don't grow granola.
And do they still have the wrappers on them as they grow?
Yeah. Canola, which is the beautiful yellow flowering plants, but it just goes on, and it's rolling hills that catch the sunlight a certain way at dawn and at dusk, and it's just an amazing place. There's a spot called Steptoe Butte. You can get some elevation. It's about 1,500 feet above the.
Is that where you are in this?
That's where we were from this shot. You've got a 360 panoramic view of the entire area from Steptoe, so you can drive around this butte and pick different locations, different foreground, different subjects. This is the Whitman County grain elevator, the growers' grain elevator, that's in the little town of Steptoe, which is about 3.5 miles away from from the butte. So that little grain elevator is quite a distance away. And
wait a minute. That is 3.5 miles from you?
3.27. I did a Google Earth on it and measured
okay, so
it out.
that's interesting to me, because let me throw out the EXIF data, assuming that what I got out of the picture is correct, and if it's not, slap me. So what was in the EXIF data in this shot is it was shot in late June 27th.
Yep.
And it was shot kind of late. It showed as 9:30 or 9:23 p.m.
That's probably not correct. I never pay attention to the time on my camera.
Okay. So that's probably what it is, the camera record. Okay.
Yeah.
But the exposure shows is 1/320th of a second. Mm-hmm. At what time would this have been?
It was probably, let's see, that was June, so sunset was
morning
probably
or
around,
dusk?
It was evening.
Okay.
Evening. So
sunsetish.
Sunsetish, yeah.
Okay, so 3/20th of a second.
Yep.
F11.
Yep.
I've got questions on that coming up, actually.
Okay.
ISO 400.
Yep.
And it's 420 millimeters, but it's not. So you're shooting with a Canon EOS 5D SR, which is super high resolution, which explains the extreme detail that you got in this shot, because that camera is amazing. Yep. But you shot it with the 300 Mark II 2.8 lens, the Canon EF 300 2.8 Mark II. IS.
That may not be correct.
It showed in the EXIF as that with a 1.4 tele.
Okay. That could be correct then.
Okay.
Yeah, because I had that, and I had a 100 to 400. So
it could be, but that's the area, and that's why the distance is interesting to me. It doesn't seem like you'd get that close on this or that much detail on this from that far away with a 300 or a 400 lens.
Yeah. It's a combination of the atmospherics. The weather was clear enough that you're going to get the extra detail. The 5D SR has the got the low pass filter sort of defeated, so that adds some sharpness to it.
It does by default.
By default, that's what the R is in the camera designation.
Oh, as opposed to the 5DS.
S, yeah.
Okay, so you're popping a little more detail and sharpness in it.
A little more detail and sharpness. I think it overdoes it a bit in some cases. But I was looking at the file before we started, and you can almost make out individual tree leaves next to the granary there, which is, like I said, 3 miles away.
I zoomed in on this. You sent me only a 2,000 pixel file on this. I zoomed in on that grain house.
Yeah. You
can read the text on that grain house.
Oh, yeah.
It is shockingly it is shockingly sharp. So the Palouse is an area, like I say, you do workshops there.
Yeah.
So people, if you want to, we'll talk about the workshops at the end, but if you're looking to do a workshop with somebody and get a really unique workshop because he's not just a stills photographer, but I believe the cinematography comes into play hands down. This is your guy. So photographing Palouse, so many people do it. It is an iconic area. I'm guessing when you're on this bluff, this butte, that there's 400 million people on there with you.
Yeah, it can be crowded, and you just kind of set up in the tripod spots where they're marked in past days.
So that brings to me, you are the perfect person to ask this question to. Okay. So everybody complains, oh, I went to Paris and I wanted to shoot the Eiffel Tower, but it's been shot so many times from every different angle and it's all been done, which I don't believe, right? There's always a way to do the Dead Poet Society move of, stand on a desk and see the world from a different angle, right? But, Washington, D.C., the Monument, all over the world, we have these things. And there are workshops in Palouse with phenomenal photographers. Absolutely. My buddy Rick Salmon, I think, does a workshop there. Scott Bourne does a workshop there. Some of the best people out there do workshops here. So as both a workshop instructor, a photographer, and cinematographer, I have never seen a shot. I've seen this kind of scene with the grain house and everything. I've never seen a shot like this from Palouse. How do you go shoot, generically, right? How do you go shoot, forgetting this image, a spot that's been photographed hundreds of times, thousands of times, and get something that is your own vision?
That's a good question, and I don't know that I have a really straight answer for that, but it's I think you draw upon, and we do this in cinematography, and I teach cinematography as well. But I tell my students is being a cinematographer or being a photographer is drawing on your life experience, drawing on your emotions, drawing on what visual inputs that you have had. I just was in Los Angeles earlier last week, and
we should have connected.
Yeah, we should have. But I went to the Norton Simon Museum and looked at some of the most beautiful paintings, original masterpieces from the great works. That sort of thing informs your vision, influences your vision, and you can always find, I think, a new and fresh approach to almost any subject if you allow yourself to think outside the box. And I hate that term tremendously, but you've got to see it from a different perspective, and any influence that you can get from the outside to get your creative juices going is well worth time. The time spent to do it.
So let's drill down on that for a second. Okay. So you're in this spot, you're set up on your tripod, you're looking at this scene. Now this scene, the shapes, the beautiful soft shapes, right? Those rolling hills, the amazing color transitions here. First of all, I have to ask, is it that way to your eye, or is that post?
It's mostly that way to your eye. I try not to be too heavy-handed in post with my colors.
Okay.
It had just rained a day or two before. The ground there has this sort of reddish hue to it, and being moist, it just made the ground a little bit more saturated. So there's places where the crops have not filled in completely, so you'll see hints of red around
from the soils.
From the soil. And of course, you wait for the light to do what you want it to do. And I usually always shoot with a polarizer, Tiffin polarizer, and I'll play with it till I get I'll knock some of the edge off the reflections off, and just till I get what I want from it. And I think that all plays into it. Helps with the blues and the distance. And
well, see, and again, Rick Salmon is a friend of mine, and he will always say people use their circular polarizers often incorrectly because they turn it to the strongest effect, which is not what you want. You're right.
That's not what you want to do. It's an artistic tool. It's another brush in the palette. Right. And just because it's doing the most work doesn't mean it's necessarily doing what you want it to do.
Exactly. So you're looking at this scene from this bluff, this butte. In James' mind's eye, what is it you're looking for in composition between the textures and the colors? And there's a lot of objects in this shot, right? I mean, yeah, the grain house stands out because of its height and its color palette of the building completely stands out from the other objects, which are mostly greenish, etc. What is your mind eye looking at when you compose this? For example, there's very little sky. Sky's hazy. Now, I love that the haze naturally falls back, right? You have this fading back, and you made the comment earlier that part of this was atmospheric. So as you're standing there, you're thinking atmosphere, you're thinking light. What are you thinking about element and composition wise?
Well, I'm always looking for the balanced composition. You know, something that leads the eye. You want to keep the photographer or the viewer's eye within the image. Obviously, the sky wasn't that interesting, so I cropped it out. There's a little bit at the top there. I think you can see. But going back to the haze, that's something that I played with the polarizer to, cut through some of it, but not completely remove it, because that's from paintings from masters of landscape. You look at their stuff and it always fades to the haze in the background. I wanted a hint of that in there. I use a Hoodman loop on the live view on the back of the camera, just like with the old 4x5 swings and tilt cameras I used to shoot with back in the day. Especially with that 5DSR, which being a 50 megapixel camera, you want to get things sharp. You want to make sure you're composing, and it just gives you a nice view of the screen. So I'm playing around and tweaking things, and then just waiting for light, waiting for the moment.
You've said waiting for light twice so far, and I'm curious. You go up to this area. How long are you waiting?
Well, I mean, you go up and you set up, you frame, you find the image you want, and then sometimes
knowing the light's not right yet.
Knowing the light's not right, and just you wait and you watch, I don't want to use Ansel Adams particularly, but he was famous for that. I'm nowhere near the category he was, but he was famous for taking two plates with him and waiting for the light. Sometimes he can come back days after day after day, trying to get what he had visualized in the frame.
So you mentioned and I mentioned I love the way that the haze goes back and you have just a little bit of sky. There are photographers that would have cropped this in such a way. And by the way, you mentioned Ansel used to take two plates out. I just interviewed Ben Horn, San Diego-based photographer that shoots large format film landscapes. He hikes back with film in his backpack. But there are a lot of photographers that would have looked at the haziness of the sky, and there's no detail in the sky, and they would have cropped that down. And I may have been one of them because I'm not a landscape shooter. Until I see this and go, oh, well, that would have been stupid. Because that haze is that's what draws me on a Z-axis through the picture.
And that's one of the issues when you're shooting, because that's with a long lens. I mean, and what does long lens do is it compresses distance. So that's another way, another technique of showing the viewer that there is distance here, because we're used to that turning blue cast as it goes back further in the distance, and a little bit. If you really look at the image, you can see some of the mountains in Western Washington on the horizon. So
I said I had questions on the F11.
Yeah.
Again, not a landscape photographer. I admit it before I get a ton of emails and comments on the video going, Steve, why do you ask these stupid questions? Okay. It happens. Okay. It happens. I readily admit I have no clue what I'm talking about on anything, pretty much. Ask my family. So F11, you're shooting, and this is the fitting point for this question because you mentioned lens compression, right? Most people would look at this and go, I'm not going to shoot it with 16 millimeter. I'm 3 miles away. It's going to be so wide and so big. There's not going to be any detail. I'm going to shoot with a longer lens to try and frame it with where the grain house is where I want it. Blah. They're not thinking compression. They're thinking framing. Okay. But at F11, at that kind of a zoom, that's not a huge depth of field,
That's not a lot of depth of field. No, it's not.
There are people that would have shot this. There are people that would have shot it at f8, right? The sweet spot, as it were. There are people that would have shot it at sweet 16. There are people that would have, shot it at 22. Why 11? What made you choose? You're on a tripod. You didn't need 320. ISO 400, reasonable. Keep the noise down, but there's no noise in that camera, right? Why f11?
It was a compromise, actually. I probably would have gone a little deeper into the stop, maybe a 22. But there was some wind blowing, and I wanted to reduce, camera vibration as much as possible.
So you may have needed the 320 tripod or not. Okay.
Yeah.
Bad assumption on my part. All right.
And I don't like using the image stabilization on it for tripod work. And so I was just waiting. I'd have it, magnified on live view, and which I like to do because the mirror's locked up. That reduces a little bit of vibration. And I was just waiting for the image to settle down. And you've got to pull out all the tricks in the book. And so 11 seemed like the place to be.
It works.
Yeah, I think there's more depth of field out of it than you imagine you will get.
I wonder if that's the body. Maybe it's that detail.
It could be,
and the lack of the low pass filter.
Yeah. So
high pass filter.
Low pass. The low pass filter.
Low pass filter.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've mentioned it a couple of times, but this type of thing in photography really intrigues me, right? When a wedding photographer friend of mine goes with me to a concert and shoots a concert, that's fascinating for me to watch, right?
Right.
But so many photographers now are starting to want to make that transition into motion.
Right.
You already do both. So I'm curious how much in your head they overlap. When you're shooting stills, do you believe that you see it with a cinematic mind?
I don't really think I can help but do it because, most of my career I've been strictly shooting, not that I haven't shot stills the whole career, but strictly shooting cinematography, filmmaking. So you're always thinking in, shot sequences, you're thinking for the edit, wide shot, medium shot, close up, sort of thing. And then again, the cinematic framing for it. I really kind of like widescreen, 239 aspect ratio films, and
235 to 1, 185.
Yeah. So you could pull that out of that image if you wanted to. I could crop it out and make just a nice panorama out of it. But I think the image was there. It stood by itself the way it did. So, it always influences the motion. Always influences what I'm doing. Sometimes I have to pull back and say, okay, we're not moving. This is not moving. This is a still shot. And what can I do to make it work as a still shot rather than motion?
Because to me, one of the things that leaped out at me is cinematic in this is I know a million photographers who would have shot possibly close to this framing with the grain house on a third, on a rule of third. But they would have put it on the top left rule of third because they would have felt that is what was telling you the distance. And by putting it on the front rule of third and then having the rolling hills, you've got the main subject is the foreground subject, and then the depth and expanse is emphasized by the disappearing horizon line. There are also people that I would have known that would have kept some of the sky, but in Lightroom would have done a gradient filter to try and darken it or God forbid, oversaturate, the skyline. And it feels like film. I don't mean still film, right? I mean, it feels like a motion picture where most photographers tend to, I want more clarity. I want more saturation. I want this pop, right? Because it's a frozen moment in time. Mm-hmm. Cinematographers tend to go a little more towards realistic, but there, right?
It's. I think it's a different aesthetic that we have that we've developed over time, knowing that you can. We want people to look at the image as long as possible, even though we're moving on from one image to the next. You still want to have that one image tell the story, and it's and this is, I don't know what the story is in this, it's a grain elevator in the middle of the field, but it's an emotion, I think, more than anything else. It's the feeling of this landscape and what it means to be there and see all this beauty.
No, but I can picture the digital shot from this almost like it's on a rail, slightly panning as it then starts to curve and zoom in and go into one of the windows in the grain elevator as you see an employee in there. I mean, I can see the motion in this shot. And again, it could just be me because I know your history, but
and the employee's backlit and he's dumping grain into the thing. And
you see what I mean? Yeah. That's the story I see in this. I see this as an establishment scene.
Yeah.
For something that's gonna come, and I'm curious what's gonna come. And I see that in a still. That, my friend, is the beauty of it. So you try not to do too much, but what do you use for post?
Most all my post is, I do a hybrid workflow, especially on that image. I used the Canon DPP Digital Professional software to come out of the RAW format into a 16-bit TIFF, and then import that 16-bit TIFF into Photoshop so that I've got 16-bit color in Photoshop.
So not a Lightroom user at all?
I play with Lightroom a lot. I've not really gotten into it enough to be proficient with it, but I'm definitely Photoshop for sure.
Okay. What would have been done to this shot? Overall, I think I brought it in. I always shoot in neutral color space, so the camera doesn't put anything in there that I don't want it to. And I bring it in. I do a little color pop with the filters in DPP. I think they've got a landscape and they've got a high detail one. I think I used high detail on that one. And then I export it into Photoshop. I think I actually did a soft blend with it, duplicate the image and then do a soft blend. Picks up the contrast a little bit that way. And maybe a little bit of saturation, but there wasn't a whole lot of anything going on that I recall. I tried to get it in camera. I tried to do all this in camera. I don't like, having to do a whole lot in post. So somebody goes out on a workshop with you, somebody not good at landscape like me. You're going to give one tip to help people get better at shots like this, landscape stuff. What would you tell them?
See it with your eyes first. See it with your heart first, I think is probably the best way to say it.
Okay. Experience it. Be in the moment.
Experience the moment. Don't just throw a camera and a tripod up there and start banging away. Look at what you're intended to do. Think about the shot before, engage the brain before you click the shutter.
Okay. Makes sense. Now, here's the harder one. Somebody that is doing, this is happening a lot with wedding photographers. They're a stills photographer and they're realizing I really need to move into motion.
Right.
So for a stills photographer that wants to start experimenting with whether they're just going to use their same DSLR, whatever it is, what is your one tip to help somebody who shoots stills get better at that move to video?
There's several things to think of, and one of them is even though it's movies, don't move the camera too much. That's the worst thing you can do is you see somebody out here bouncing the camera around. Have a decent tripod, get on a tripod, and think in terms of establishing a scene, doing a medium shot, doing a close-up. Always think in terms of at least 3 shots that way. Typically you're probably not going to be doing a dialogue scene, but our basic dialogue scene is establisher, 2-shot, over the shoulder, close up, lunchtime.
Okay. So really, go watch a movie and learn.
That's the best thing to do. Go, turn the film off, turn the sound off, and watch a movie and just look at the shots. Think about what shots they're doing.
I like the turn the sound off tip.
Turn the sound
tip
off
right there.
That's the.
So before we get into how people can find you and find your workshops, etc., you mentioned to me, you just sent this to me today, and I find this interesting. So ASC, what's ASC?
ASC, that's the American Society of Cinematographers.
Okay.
We're an organization in Hollywood that's going to be 100 years old next year. We're 10 years older than the Academy of Motion Pictures. And it's a very select group of cinematographers. There's been less than 900 of us invited for membership in 100 years. So.
And let's clarify, it's Hollywood, California, because there is a Hollywood, Florida.
Yeah,
and
Hollywood, California, yeah.
So ASC has a photo gallery going on at their clubhouse in Hollywood, California. And it is still photos, even though it's a cinematography group, it's still photos from some of the top directors of photography that there are in the business. Yep. And these photos are going to be on display in this clubhouse until fall. The gallery is open by appointment to the public. And I just want to put the address out there. It's 1782 North Orange Drive in Hollywood. Yep. Which, if I'm not mistaken, Orange is where I'm a Magic Castle member, and I think it's where I turn to go to Magic Castle.
It's right across the street from Magic Castle. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, I know the area then. You're right there behind Mann's Chinese Theater.
Yeah, yeah.
So if people want to find you more, what's your website?
JamesNeihouse.com is for my workshops. JamesNeihousASC.com is my cinematography website. Okay. But the workshops are through JamesNeihouse.com. Simple as that.
And let's clarify the spelling of Niehaus. It's N-E-I-H-O-U-S-E.
Yep.
So James Neihouse, N-E-I-H-O-U-S-E. And you're on Facebook.
I'm on Facebook.
70. This is interesting, by the way. 70 millimeter, meaning 70 mm. Yep. DOP, Director of Photography.
Yep.
Instagram, it's 70 millimeter, 70 mm DP.
Yep.
Director of Photography. Twitter, you're also 70 mm DP.
Yep.
And then you're also on Vimeo, the 70 mm DP.
Yeah.
But trust me, there's okay.
If you Google me, you'll find me.
Yeah, there's not going to be a ton of this name. So, but if you go look at the blog post on thisweekinphoto.com for this episode, the gallery of images is not just the Palouse, right? He shoots a lot of really cool stuff, and you'll know the one I mean when you see the launch pad shot, right?
Yep.
The colors in that shot, dude. So go to thisweekinphoto.com, check out Behind the Shot, look for the James Neihouse episode, and seriously, look at the gallery down there. I've got all these links there. You can find James, give him some love online, follow him everywhere that you can. And James, thank you so much for being on Behind the Shot. I really appreciate it.
Well, Steve, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed talking with you, and look forward to doing it again. And next time I'm in LA, we'll have to have a adult beverage somewhere.
Yeah, I will partake in that. I will definitely partake in that.
Come to the clubhouse and we'll have a drink.
That'd be awesome. If you do come out, I'd love to go see this.
You bet.
Stills photo show as well. So again, James Neihouse, thank you for being on Behind the Shot. As always, this is the podcast where we try and get inside the mind of great photographers like James to get a better idea of how their mind works, how they assemble their photos, how they post-process their photos. We have a huge backlog right there of back episodes or back catalog of episodes at thisweekinphoto.com. You can find us in iTunes. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. So rather than just watch it here on the website or in YouTube, which you can do both, subscribe to the podcast, drop us a review in iTunes. It's always appreciated. And you can always reach out to me if you want to. My links are on the website too, but it's Steve Brazel, at Steve Brazel on Twitter or Instagram. It's like Brazil, but 2 L's. Facebook, it's Steve Brazel Photography. Reach out. I try and answer everybody that comments on the videos. And again, thank you very much for watching. I'm your host. This is the Behind the Shot podcast, and we will see you on the next episode.
Hey there, I'm Frederick Van Johnson. Thanks for checking out the TWiP Network on YouTube. If you'd like to keep up to date with the shows we're putting out, be sure to click subscribe. And while you're at it, give us a thumbs up. You can also subscribe on thisweekinphoto.com, where you'll find lots of other great photography shows. Thanks for watching the TWiP Network on YouTube.